Hey guys, alright, today we are here with a new channel that I saw recently recommended to me. Or well, when I'm uploading this, probably not so recently, like over maybe a week by the time this gets uploaded. I can't remember days. Anyways, this is by Geo History, called World War II short version. I don't know what to expect. I just know it was recommended, and it sounded interesting. I think the person who commented this, I'm sorry, I can't remember who you are, said that this looks at things maybe, aren't typically looked at when discussing World War II and its battles. So, sounds neat. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, this is the short version, so maybe this isn't the version they wanted me to watch, and it may actually brush over the small things that, he said, the person commented that they look at. I don't know. Let's go ahead and just dive in.
It is the largest armed conflict that humanity has known.
That was
a deadly war that involved tens of millions of fighters around the world. Let's retrace on a map a summary of the main events of World War II.
Yes, please, let's do that. Ooh, starting
at the end of World War I, Germany and its allies are defeated and held solely responsible for the war. With heavy sanctions imposed upon them, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires are dismantled, while Germany has to repay what many consider an unreasonable debt. Its colonies and some of its territories are ceded to the victors and to Poland, which is recreated. These sanctions are seen as humiliation by the German people. The German economy is weakened by excessive debt and suffers hyperinflation.
Yep.
National mints try to address this by printing banknotes, causing a devaluation of its currency.
Which only furthers the hyperinflation.
Between 1914 and November 1923,
here comes
the value of the
statistic.
mark grew by 1,000 billion.
No matter what, if anyone ever talks about Germany's hyperinflation, I can guarantee you that they will mention the value. They will bring up some statistic that shows the value of a German mark. I did it when I was a teacher assistant. I think I even taught this lesson like twice because I was a TA for 2 different semesters at a high school. And I used this statistic like both times. But it was more of a comparison to $1 US is this many German marks. Because I felt that would be, I'm an American. I was teaching American students. So I thought this will be the best statistic for them to wrap their heads around the sheer hyperinflation that there was on the German mark at this time.
The following year, radical measures are taken to halt inflation and stabilize and revive the economy. But in 1929, the Wall Street crash in New York causes the worst economic crisis of the 20th century.
What's funny is how we're now finally realizing today that maybe back then it wasn't the case, but certainly today, Wall Street is not an indicator for financial stability. It's fake. It's not real. That's just a place for people to fucking trade money around. If the stock market goes down, that's not a good indicator of financial stability for the average person. Remember that. If the news or billionaires, like they were when GME was going to the moon, were freaking out about stock market shit, don't listen to them. Don't listen to them.
Its impact is felt worldwide, with Germany not spared either, causing the unemployment rate to explode.
I will say, despite this only being... Alright, so we're a minute and a half in, and we've already covered the end of World War I. We've reasonably covered reparations and how Germany was had the primary blame put on them. And we've already covered hyperinflation. This is well-paced. This is well-paced.
Severely weakened, Germany sees a rise of nationalism in 1933 that allowed...
Here's a slip-up. Nationalism had been rising since about, I'd say, 1922. 1924 is kind of where I'd say they started really gaining speed. And then I can't remember the year, but whenever Hitler was put in prison, that's when they kind of ballooned into popularity because he was like selling this fucking book and he made like millions. Like he became uber fucking rich overnight pretty much from his fucking book that he wrote in prison, Mein Kampf. And then it was 1933 where they won a bunch of seats in German government. And thus they were able to play politics and gain control when Hitler assumed like chancellorship or whatever, and then merged the president and the chancellor into like one position, thus giving him dictatorial power.
That was the rise to power of the Nazi Party with Adolf Hitler at its helm. Despite the strict conditions imposed upon Germany.
Remember, I'm also trying to I'm oversimplifying all these events as like this video is. I'm just trying to explain a little bit more of what they, might be missing here that I think are fairly important in the rise of the Nazi Party.
After World War I, the new totalitarian regime resets the country and restores military service. The country also begins an aggressive foreign policy with a dream of uniting all German-speaking people. Italy, despite its victory with the Allies, is frustrated by the amount of territory it gained after World War I. Since 1922, the country is ruled by the dictatorial fascist party of Benito Mussolini. Italy begins a colonial policy by seizing Ethiopia and prepares a future invasion in Albania. In Spain begins 3 years of civil war opposing the Republican government supported by the USSR and the International Brigades and the nationalist camp led by Francisco Franco and aided by Italy and Germany. The two countries took the opportunity to test their armies and to get closer diplomatically. In Asia, Japan continues its expansionist policy. The country takes advantage of the civil war in China to invade new territories. The Japanese army uses chemical and biological weapons and commits massacres of populations.
So far, still doing good. Only 3 minutes in. They're gonna cover. I was getting a little worried, like with how little time there is in this video and how much they have to cover in World War II. But I think based on how they're doing so far, I think they've got plenty of time.
Germany is now powerful enough to launch its territorial expansion. It first annexed Austria with support from the local Nazi party. Next, the west of Czechoslovakia was invaded. The Slovak Republic becomes a German satellite state, while Hungary grows closer diplomatically. After the occupation of a part of Lithuania, Germany signs with the USSR a non-aggression pact and a plan to carve up Europe. It then attacks Poland, which provokes the United Kingdom and France to declare war, marking the beginning.
I like how they're like doing this map movement at like the same time. It's very smooth. I really like this. This is very well made. German domination.
Although the German forces are concentrated in the east, the Allied troops do not take initiative in the west. Instead, France and the United Kingdom try to cut the strategic iron ore route that passes through Norway and supplies the German military industry. Germany reacts by invading Denmark and Norway. Within days, the country captures Luxembourg, the Netherlands and Belgium. Hitler's new military strategy is called Blitzkrieg, which surprises opposition defenses with rapid, high-intensity attacks in a concentrated area. British forces retreat.
Still no complaints so far. This is where my expertise kind of runs short. I'm not a war historian. I'm more of a, I guess, political historian is what you would call me because of my work in late 800s England. Is definitely more focused on politics. But yeah, and then of course my knowledge of pre-war Germany is very, politically based.
Retreat in the face of this German military prowess, and the German army bears down on Paris. The French army is defeated and an armistice is signed. Germany occupies the north and west of France, leaving its other territory and colonies under the control of the new government. Germany thus has indirect control of French colonies without having to send an army there. However,
Yeah.
parts of the French colonies and the Belgian Congo chooses to stay in the camp of the Allies. In London, which already hosts several governments in exile, General Charles de Gaulle creates Free France, which continues to fight Nazi Germany. Brazzaville is named as its capital.
I didn't know that fact. That is interesting. I didn't know they named the capital
Pursuant
Brazzaville.
to the agreement signed with Germany, the Soviet Union seizes the Baltic states and a part of Romania. Germany, Italy and Japan combine to form the Axis powers. All dominions and British colonies, with the exception of Ireland, enter the war. In Africa, fighting begins between Italian colonies and Allied forces. While in Europe, despite the massive aerial bombing of British cities, Germany fails to take over the country. Hitler then changes his plans. He now wants to invade the USSR. But the plan is delayed by Italy, that fails to invade Greece and is forced to retreat by Allied forces.
God
After
damn it,
the
Italy.
accession of Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria to the Axis forces, the German armies head south to invade Yugoslavia and Greece.
Okay, we're into the
Everywhere
resistance.
in Europe,
Nice.
the resistance is organized in different forms. Sometimes people organize strikes, demonstrations, or protect wanted persons. Some groups spy for the Allies, conduct sabotage, or print resistance newspapers. In Eastern Europe, guerrilla forces undermine the Axis armies. In Yugoslavia and Greece, resistant communists and royalist groups confront each other. Germany isn't spared the anti-Nazi resistance, with some attempts to assassinate Hitler, which fail.
I love that brief mentioning of the resistance. That's really all that was needed to cover. Like, yeah, you could go more in depth if you wanted, but I think that was all that was needed really for this, short version, but also like even a longer version. The resistance movements are important, and they're very important in understanding the struggle of the various nations. But on the wide scope of the war, it's hard to really say. Like, especially in places like, Poland. I think in France, it's easier to see and look at the French resistance and get an understanding of how they were pretty useful in aiding the Allies in gaining control over France and winning it from the Germans. But it was also 1944, and by then the Germans were weak as fuck. So it's very hard to really quantify, in my opinion. Remember, you can disagree. Feel free to disagree with me. But from my understanding of the resistance movements, I think it's very hard to really see how impactful they were into the overall war effort. I think they're a great look at understanding the cultures and struggles of the people. That's not getting taken away from that. It's just in the wider scope of the overall conflict. I think it's hard to really tell how not important. They were important, but if they really shifted much of the war in the favor of the Allies. I think that's a better way to put
On
it.
June 22, Axis forces launched, on some counts, the largest military operation in history to attack USSR, which now passes de facto into the camp of Allied forces. The bulk of the German
See, I like that. He said de facto. He didn't say oh yeah, they just joined the fucking Allies. No. De facto pretty much makes it seem like, it's more... I don't know really the real term of it. I can't think of the dictionary term off my head, but when I hear de facto, I think of just yeah, it's essentially an alliance of necessity. An alliance of, we're fighting the same guy, let's work together.
troops, well equipped and motorized, rushed to the east. To support the Soviets, Allies occupy Iran, which then opens a supply route through the Caucasus.
Oh,
German armies arrive in Leningrad
Didn't know about
and
that.
begin a siege of the city that would last 872 days and cause more than 1 million civilian deaths. Further south, German troops were stopped at the gates of Moscow, where they suffer a harsh and deadly winter. Behind the front lines, the SS massacre Slavic and Jewish populations. In Asia, Japan occupies French Indochina. To counter its expansionist policy, the United States imposes upon it an embargo on oil and steel. In response, the Japanese conduct a surprise attack on the United States.
That's awesome that they added it. Usually, especially when I was learning about World War II in like high school or something, it's if the embargo is mentioned, it's pretty much just mentioned they did an oil embargo. They no longer were selling oil to the Japanese. Steel wasn't mentioned. So that's I like that they
States at Pearl Harbor.
just add that.
A massive aerial bombing damages a large part of the US naval fleet. The United States enters the war on the Allied side. At first, they concentrate their forces on the Pacific front. The country also provides supplies to the USSR, which continues resisting the German advance. Japan, for its part, conquers new territories in the Pacific. In addition to the massacres, Japan sends 10 million Chinese civilians into forced labor camps.
Oh, I
In
didn't know
Indonesia,
about those.
millions of prisoners suffer the same fate on the island of.
Well, I knew they were doing forced labor camps, but I didn't know it was the number was that high. But yeah, it makes sense. There's so many people that live in Asia.
Java. In Burma and Thailand, Allied prisoners are exhausted in the construction of a railway line. Moreover, hundreds of thousands of women are forcibly recruited into prostitution for the Japanese army.
Yep.
In Europe, concentration and extermination camps are built to massacre.
Ooh, I like this, how they added the difference there in the map, and you can see, all right, here's the extermination camp specific. And then here's the internment camps.
Among others, Jews, resistance fighters, political opponents, gypsies, homosexuals, and people with disabilities. Fearing a second front in Europe, Hitler built the Atlantic Wall, a series of military installations protecting the coast from invasion. But the Allies first landed in Morocco and Algeria. Italian Libya finds itself caught between the two fronts. Having lost control of its colonies, Vichy France is invaded.
Oh!
In the east, Axis forces try to cut the supply route of the Caucasus, but for the first time, the German offensive undergoes a major military setback. The Soviets take the initiative and counterattack. Africa is now entirely controlled by allies who organize a landing in Sicily. The new Italian government requests an armistice, causing the Germans to invade. The USSR advances rapidly westward, forcing the German army to concentrate on that front. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed.
What's interesting, and it's a common theme between both world wars, is that we see slowly throughout the war Germany becoming more and more on its own in fighting against the enemies against the people it's fighting against. In World War I, we saw that with, the Ottomans slowly getting taken out, and then Austria-Hungary, and then eventually it was just pretty much Germany fighting the Allies on its own, or the Entente on its own. And then here we see a more aggressive Germany invade its allies to stop them from, surrendering right away.
Normandy. Their armies quickly take over and liberate Paris. In the west, as in the east, countries are liberated or switch camps. With victory in sight, Allied powers announce the creation of the United Nations. Countries that declared war on Germany and Japan would be admitted at its founding conference. This triggers a wave of declarations of war, but without major consequence.
That's fucking interesting. Okay, that explains a lot that I wondered, and I guess no one's ever really covered it, as to why all these nations suddenly declare war on Germany at the end. It's because they wanted to get into the United Nations. Wow.
On April 30, Hitler commits suicide in his bunker just before the arrival of the Soviets. 8 days later, the country surrenders. The United States and USSR join forces to overcome the Empire of Japan. The Soviets begin a military invasion via Manchuria, while the US drops 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, Japan surrenders, marking the end of World War II. after 6 years of war, the human toll is heavy, with at least 60 million dead,
Oh my
mostly
God.
civilians. Many cities
I
are
love this showcasing of the death toll. This is a really, really well. It's a very. It makes it very easy to understand the loss of life in certain nations.
completely destroyed.
Really, this is really.
Europe
cool,
and the USSR subject millions of German prisoners of war to bonded labor, many of whom would die. Germany and Austria are carved up among the victors. The old guard of European powers are left exhausted and ruined by war. The United States and USSR emerge as the remaining global superpowers. Despite the role of the UN, which aims to maintain peace and international security, both sides would eventually engage in indirect confrontations around the world.
This was well fuck. Oh my God. Why'd no one tell me about the. Actually, someone probably told me about this channel probably a while ago, and then I never read the comment or something. It happens. Or I forgot. I most likely forgot. I'm very forgetful, and I'm sorry. But I'm glad I listened this time and got around to watching them this time. If someone did comment it before. Because this was well. Oh. I think this is the smoothest fucking map we've ever seen of World War II. Just the information was easy. The way they communicated the information was easily digestible. They were, they didn't talk too fast. They didn't talk too slowly. This was just really well fucking paced and well written. Just everything. Oh, goddamn, I love it. This is just ooh, chef's kiss. This was well fucking made. I think this might be my favorite map video we've watched. Now, I've loved every map video we've watched, but this is my favorite. So yeah, that was Geo History. Is that what the channel's called? I already forgot. World War II short version. Link to their original video down in my comments, down in the description below. Leave a suggestion down below for what you want to see me react to next, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.